All right, last class we had talked about soapstones, correct?
Yes.
And then we like went through all the soapstone stuff for Hawthorne to try and get like a vision of the context in which he's writing. And then we went and took pictures and you went to the assembly, right? That's where we kind of ended. We didn't talk about the first sentence of the book. Okay, cool. Then in your packets, the very first page of that transcendentalism packet, I've copied the prison door for you, that first chapter. Was this the class where you guys pointed out specifically that chapter? Was it you, that Parker, that pointed out that chapter is all just 2 pages about a door?
Yes.
Okay. But it was somebody in this class. All right. So
He sounds like someone who would go into deep analysis of the entire topic.
all right, and that's exactly what we are going to do. So yes, it feels there's a ton of detail in this first chapter, and it feels excessive because you're just like, okay, I get it. It's a prison door with a rose bush outside. Like, okay, move on. But sometimes in literature, when you're seeing that kind of excessive detail, it's actually a sign that there is something more going on there. There's some kind of symbolism, English teacher stuff, symbolism going on there, or the excessive details are meant to set the scene in a very specific way so that we're kind of primed to understand the themes. And the first sentence of a book is always really significant for giving us like the tone of the book and setting and like kind of giving us a kind of atmosphere right off the bat, right? So the first sentence here is actually an entire little paragraph. What I'm going to have you do is choose 3 words or very short phrases. So tops 3 words. From that first sentence. So the one, you could do steeple crowned. It doesn't have to be steeple, but ideally just 3 separate words in that first sentence. You and the person sitting next to you, and we're just going to go down like this. These guys partner up, these guys partner up, these guys partner up, and then 2 and 2. All right, cool. So if you're in one where the desk is blank, and you can do 3. So with that partner, you are going to just talk about what you think the significance of these 3 words are. So choose which 3 words you think are significant, talk about why you think they're significant, and then these packets are all yours. You can write all over them. It's why I print them for you. So you're going to write in the sides about why those words are significant. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes to do this. Yep, the very first sentence.
I like sex. So it's underline like words in the first sentence. Yeah, I was thinking
Yeah. Well, it's like the rest of the stuff around it also. I like the word when hope started when you invite it. It makes me think about the huge door that's starting on a class. I think like what's the next school, I just make every word like that. But my advice is I would start there.
the iron spikes. I don't know, keep people out. So that and should have a large random. She's just like right there. Like that. And I actually I'm tired of her. You should always underline it.
Oh, yeah.
These ones actually, it's bad. They were just like, there's like some excellent there. I feel like it adds a little extra spice. It's like really.
So you're just making observations in the side about the significance of the word, right?
Why the symbol in front of the word? What is that?
I also feel like with sad colored garments, if it's like bearded men in sad colored garments, it's also
Good luck.
reference to religion, how strong the religion is. They were
Building is really large. So it's just showing the scale of building.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I put punishment. I said, like, starts to paint pictures of like the time of the, it's like maybe a reference to how they society.
Okay, here's what you're gonna do next. So some of these, I mean, most of these words, maybe edifice, you don't know what it means, but the rest of them are pretty common English words, but I'm still going to have you look up the definition, and I'll show you why. So I'm going to focus on the word gray. I think this is an interesting word here. Why make sure that we know that it's gray, right? And so I look up gray definition, and I thought I knew what gray meant. Color intermediate between black and white. Yeah, that sounds like what I thought it was, somewhere between black and white, right? But that word intermediate I find very fascinating. I'm going to do something with that. And then it says after that, it says as of ashes or lead, which is really weird that they like choose those two things to like bring up in the definition. Yeah, Noah?
With the word gray, there's two different spellings of it because that's the more Americanized one. So it tells you that even though this sounds English, it's still America. Like, yeah, you spell it with
That's more British. I always knew there was two spellings, but I didn't know one was American, one was British. Yeah, okay, cool. So there's something like particularly American about the word.
like old because the rest of the word is 17.
Right. I'm also looking up words like or I look up gray, and there's also a whole bunch of other definitions, like 20 definitions on here. Of the weather, cloudy and dull. Of a person having gray hair. So it's related to old people collectively. Of a person's face, pale as through tiredness, age, or illness. Oh, it's without interest or character, dull and nondescript. And suddenly all of those definitions are kind of sparking ideas into my head about why he might choose to forefront this idea that the hats are gray. So I'm going to start writing in the margins about gray. You and your partner are going to choose one word that you think has the most significance for you, or like you had the most interesting thing to say about that one word, and you're going to look up the dictionary definition. So just the word definition, and see what kind of ideas are sparked by looking at that definition. Okay, go ahead.
I think we should do iron is I don't think we did like one word or anything like that. Yeah. I forgot my
Yeah.
I guess you could say. I just already wrote about
His phone's not loading.
Okay, mine is, okay, so it says a mineral. Iron is part of hemoglobin, a protein. Your body needs the right amount of iron. So when I learn more about
Strong metallic. That's magnetic.
you know what?
I know.
Okay, so it can also be a verb.
Yeah.
So I wrote, sad,
It's not
sad,
Actually, it's not that. I'm on the top of That's more implement now. Yeah, there's a problem. And then
Then I think from my right, we often use the word.
Well, iron is great.
Yeah, I know.
Figuratively as a symbol of firmness, strength, or resistance.
No, mine is really bad.
she's wearing yellow.
Okay, so I think that's the best.
All right, I want you to show you what I'm doing so far with gray. I'm not done yet, but I'm thinking about how it's this intermediate place. So it's like not one thing or the other, but at the same time, if it's associated with lead and old people, it's also like kind of stubborn. Kind of roasting old people up here, but like it's kind of stubborn. I use the word intractable. Like lead isn't movable. It's a really strong, hard substance, right? So if it's in between, but it's also this strong substance, it's like they're committed to not making a commitment. They don't want to be fully one thing black or fully the other thing white. They want to kind of like stay in this neutral area. I would say kind of associate that with like the status quo. I'm also thinking about if it's associated with ashes, that means it's like associated with death a little bit. And that seems to be, this sounds harsh, but also associated with old people. The death and the ashes part, or the old people and the ashes part kind of goes together. So I'm going to do some work on why their gray hats would be sort of recalling a death-like aspect. And I'm going to try and work that out. So this is the kind of work that I'm wanting you to do on the page right now. If you don't have, if you only have like one or two little words in the side written down, you're like not nearly there enough. So keep thinking about how to apply the definitions to the significance of the word. They don't, it's just like keep going with it. Keep like trying to dig into it.
Okay, wait, so read it. So that could be about like society and like fighting or resistance. Like if it's really like and then like it said something about handlers, so it could be like the punishment part of it.
Oh my god.
I also see danger. Like iron spikes. Like when it's put together, it's like it could either hurt you or it's trying to keep you away from something.
Yeah. Resistant.
But then I also said like bars. And iron is gray too. Prison bars. That's what I think.
Like iron bars,
It's made to, it's used for a lot of weapons. So it like symbolizes some violence.
Hello, Lexi.
So if you think of like handcuffs or like chains, so like if the door is studded with iron spikes, then the door could be symbolizing captivity.
Yeah.
You're still connecting to audio, so I'm gonna write here what we're doing. This is not feeling well.
Maybe a large building. This has a lot of crime.
Okay, let's meet back together. All right, so let's just talk about some of the words that you guys talked about. I found gray interesting. I've got my thoughts up here about why I think gray is interesting. Some of this stuff is going to apply to how I think about the novel. Some of this stuff I'm like, that might not be completely where I want to take this. I don't really care at this point. We talked about this kind of on the first day, but I don't really care if Hawthorne was thinking through all this stuff. I'm sure he wasn't. I'm sure when he was talking about gray, he was thinking more just about this, the nondescriptness of it, the boringness of gray, you know, the fact that it's not vibrant or interesting, so that when you've got a big red scarlet A, it stands out against a gray backdrop. But it doesn't really matter what Hawthorne was interested in. When he used the word gray, he sets the stage in a certain way for me to bring my own meaning to it. So now I'm thinking about old people and how terrible old people are, you know, and I'm applying that to how I understand the book. So which words did you guys talk about? Yeah, Ben.
We did sad colored, and it immediately came up. We literally looked at the sad color definition, and it's like this color of choice for like the Massachusetts.
Right, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's funny. So they probably pulled that right from Hawthorne, right?
Well, it's kind of based. The one thing that I thought was interesting was it says that sad color doesn't have to do with sadness. That it's typically spelled SADD, which relates to seriousness.
Ah, good.
So it sets more of like a dismal tone. But I thought it was interesting that with these two like words, the one hyphenated word, it just kind of tells you the tone and like the actual setting of where this book will be. Because it says that the colors relating to seriousness are the colors of choice for the clothing of members of Massachusetts. So it was like really specifically.
Okay, I like this too, that it's like the color of choice, because I'm thinking like circumstances of being in an early American colony, maybe you don't have that much, like there's probably not a lot of purple around just because there's not a lot of purple dye. But I like that they're like on purpose saying the color of choice, meaning that this is the way that they want to look. They want to be sad colored. And I like that clarification. It's not necessarily about them being like heartbroken or even depressed. It's more about like they've chosen that they want to present themselves in a very serious way. All right, cool. Tell me about another word. Yeah, Sebastian.
Well, our group chose the heavily timbered.
Okay,
And
cool.
it's kind of like, since they didn't, I mean, besides the title of the chapter, they didn't, it hasn't said it's a prison yet.
Yeah.
But like that, it says like the heavily timbered door with studded iron spikes. And it just like, you can tell from that, like it's this big thick door. It's like probably really heavy. There's metal in it. And it just like, you can kind of hear it slamming. And it's just a massive thing.
Awesome.
So it's kind of cool to just get all that from a few words.
Awesome. So if it is like thick and massive and you can kind of hear it slamming, then this idea of it being heavily timbered. Tell me about that word heavily. What did you guys talk about with that? Like what kind of connotation does heavily have?
It could be like, yeah,
Okay.
kind of like that, or just like just thick wood, and I don't know what.
Yeah. I feel like, so it could have said thickly timbered, right? But I feel like heavily has a bit more of a negative connotation to it. Like what kind of emotion potentially could be assigned to heavily? Ellen? Okay, a weight. Awesome. And it seems like on you. So there's something like more personal about heavily rather than the security part, which is like, oh, thank goodness, let's get those criminals off the street. The heavily timbered almost seems to weigh on the reader a little bit more and feels more depressed. Ooh, that's an interesting one, like pressed, like heavily pressed on. Yeah. Then we've got numbness. And lonely. Excellent. No.
I thought that heavily kind of implies that someone's trying to remove it. You know, it sounds like it's
Ah.
there on purpose, kind of like a barricade. That's kind of where you get like in sense is it's like instead of saying thick, because thick means the same thing you said. It's like, wow, look how much wood's here. But if you say
Yeah.
heavily timbered, it's like I think of this is stupid, but you know how in Kung Fu Panda where he talked about how much security they have. Like he didn't say like, wow, look at how sharp our arrows are. He's just like, look how many arrows we have.
Okay, good. So it's more about like
It gives the
vastness.
defense.
Yeah, vast and
Yeah.
defense.
The point is that it's stopping people from.
Stopping. Excellent. Anything else we want to add to heavily double?
I think that like with this, as much as the door, I think that this could also be talking like the.
Ah, yes. Okay, tell me.
So like, it's like hard to move, like they're very like steadfast, which kind of relates back to like your gray, how they're like stubborn. Yeah,
Mhm.
and so it also like, it like, with like, talk about like, 'cause we used this.
Yeah.
And that was with that we connected that it said it was also a complex system of beliefs.
Mhm.
So all they all believe the same like base principles, and probably all have their own like kind of side beliefs. And you can kind of do that later when they're sitting there arguing about it.
Mhm.
Harley, no. Down. Down.
Awesome. So it's this idea that they want to put on the surface that maybe this is a big building, a big intrusive building, I think is part of the definition.
Yeah.
But underneath, it's this complex system. So you're saying like there could be these individual beliefs, but it's almost like they feel the need to get to the place where everyone agrees because they're so stubborn and see themselves as steadfast. So everyone needs to buy into that same belief. Yeah, Ellie Rose.
Along with edifice, I chose strong
Mhm.
because both mean like a large and big group.
Mhm.
And so it really explains the society that is judging the criminals.
Yeah.
It's not just a small scale thing. It's essentially this like entire world that places their own like belief system upon criminals.
Okay, good. So in order to get there, I think we want to combine these two, right? It's this intrusive building and it's also a system of beliefs that sits in the middle of this town, meaning that the intrusive building, like it doesn't necessarily look like it fits into everything else. It casts a very big shadow. It's just this big, monstrous, heavily timbered thing in the middle of their city. And it's somehow like signifying or representing their complex set of beliefs. And that's not a church, it's a prison. Do you think it's important? Yeah.
I think to go along with the like complexity of it,
Yeah.
it does show that they're now like a modern society that can have, because I chose studded, and it can have ornamented things, especially made of iron, which shows that they are complex enough to have that. And also the size of it shows that they are, I guess, a modern. It's not modern, but they're not like shacks.
Okay, good. So that they've actually created a kind of community, right?
Yeah.
And that this community has some aesthetics involved with it, which is like, if you think about like a Maslow's pyramid of needs or whatever that's called, we need like shelter and food. Being like studs on things is not a high priority. It's almost like an expression of creativity, but they've expressed their creativity. They've decorated, not themselves, not in their sad colored garments and gray hats, but their prison has the decorations on it. You know, that's the thing that they're choosing to like make their place of creativity and beauty in a weird way. Yeah, Elios.
They're also very animalistic. They remind me of like a sheep, like in their community sense. The way like they like move around or dress.
Yes, and absolutely, because throng usually has animal associations with it. In the definition, it says that. We usually don't refer to people as a throng. We refer to animal groups as a throng. Yeah, Noble?
One thing I also kind of like noticed just throughout the book, that it kind of like everyone, it kind of shows that everyone has their inside like problems and like feelings. And I think that like this really is good at symbolizing that.
Mm-hmm.
Because like you can put on those studs and those ornaments and make it look good on the inside or on the outside, but then on the inside you've got the numbness and like depressive like vibes that you get from like that.
Yes, yes. So it's got that contradiction that maybe there are some in the crowd, right? There's some ornamentation. There's an impulse to be interesting, and yet on the surface, everything needs to be boring. And that contradiction can be painful. Yeah.
So with that like contradiction, me and Elle chose hoods because we kind of said that it covers the people's like views on like if people can change or not, and also like how hoods can cover your head, and sometimes it's hard to tell who that person is when they're wearing a hood.
Good.
It's like how people they'll hide who they are underneath their secrets in the book.
Yeah, which is like a huge comfort for the people in this book. One of my favorite scenes is when Hester's walking around, and is right at the very beginning, she notices that people look at her differently when she's wearing the scarlet A, but it's not the way she expected. She thought everyone would look at her and judge her and be like, ew, gross, adultery, but what they actually do is they recognize themselves in her. And she's really disturbed by that idea. And potentially, I mean, that might be because everyone's hooded. Everyone is kind of covering up who they really are, their real impulses and their real beliefs, so that they can all kind of fit in. And that's the way their society works. Noah?
When that happened in the book, I was like thinking just kind of the way they said like they recognize themselves, like just kind of reminds me like maybe they have done her thing and they haven't gotten caught. They know.
Absolutely.
I actually wrote, there's like this thing in the New Testament where like Jesus says, let him who is without sin cast the first stone. And so it's like they kind of imply like, they are sinning, and just the way that it's like she's the only one in the entire village really that's, we know that for adultery to happen there has to be two people, it's like that's like the whole point of the book, I get. For them to all be like, wow, she's got the red A, like someone else is identifying with her, and they say they recognize themselves in her, and maybe it's not adultery, but it's like they've committed a sin that they know they should be ostracized for because they relate to her.
Yes, and it's, I think, super interesting too that when Christ says that in the Bible, he's talking about a sexual sin specifically. And so he is kind of like acknowledging like, good luck with your impulses. Like, that's why you need sort of grace, that's why you need mercy.
Well,
and they're not willing to give that.
I hate it because like their whole community, like Puritan Protestant communities are based on ideals. Like it's very theological. And so for them to like be like, well, like when it says that the Reverend has as much power as the mayor, and I was like, well, then like you should try to read into what you try to preach, like all of Jesus's stuff is forgiveness. And they're like, oh, we need to know who did it and who else did it with you. It's like that's how their bad guys look in the Bible, and they're acting just like them.
Right. And Lexi just pointed out, like, this is going to be particularly painful for Hester because she seems to be kind of like an introverted, quiet person. And yet everybody is like focusing their attention on her as the symbol of their sin. One other thing that's important here is like the idea of how Puritans gain salvation. So like, I feel like in our culture, in just like American culture, it's all about, I mean, these days, back then, different. These days, it's like if you behave well, if you are nice to other people and you do acts of service and all of this stuff, you can kind of like earn your way into heaven, right? Like you do good things, and that's why you are rewarded with heaven. The Puritans did not see it that way. I don't know if we talked about this in this class, but they didn't see it that way. They saw it as God's grace is what gets you into heaven. And so if you're going around acting great and you're acting sinless, then that is a sign that you're going to heaven. It's like you're behaving the way that God has singled you out to be. And they're like, Puritans are going to heaven. We're good. But when Hester gets the A, everyone knows, oh, she's not one of the saved ones. She's one of the ones that God decided not to save. And when she can recognize everybody else as also being sinful, then it's kind of starts, their whole belief system starts to crumble. It's like, well, then can anyone be saved if everyone is sinful like that? Rose?
You think that they downplay their own like sins based off how they see Heather.
What do you mean by downplay?
So,
They see her as this epitome of like a devil child,
Yeah.
and
Oh, you mean Pearl, the devil child, or Hester?
like kind of, but they see like as a symbol of like Satan, basically.
Mm-hmm.
And they think, you think that they think, oh, she's done worse than me, therefore, like I'm saved.
Oh, interesting. Do we see?
Comparing sins,
Yeah.
where it's like, oh, if mine is not as bad as hers, then I'm okay, because at least I'm a little bit better than that.
Do we get evidence of that in the book of characters doing that? I can't remember a specific instance, but it sounds right.
It feels like, it gives off that vibe.
Yeah. She's put in a figure of a scapegoat. The scapegoat is the one when like all you guys did something wrong, but you're like, Daniel did the baddest thing. And so Daniel takes all the blame, right? And everybody else is like, ooh, we're good. So I think Hester gets that, and that might be where we're getting that from. Yeah. I just chose the person who seems to be the not baddest.
Wow.
Oh no. I didn't mean to, but if I had said Parker, like you would know, right? I meant for real. All right, so let's move on from this first sentence. I wanted to get into a description of the book, but I also wanted to demonstrate just how intense you can get with your reading. Everybody in here was doing, not everyone, but for the most part, doing different words, right? I bet some people did iron spikes or just spikes. Yeah, and some people might have done steeple crowned and etc. Assembled is an interesting one. Like I said before, it doesn't mean that Hawthorne spent 6 hours writing this first sentence. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. There's no way we can know, right? But it does mean that we can look at the sentence and we can say, okay, how did these choices that Hawthorne made lead to some kind of argument? Like, how can we take his choices and say that they're rhetorically significant? And that's ultimately what we're leading towards. It doesn't really matter intentions. What matters is like what meaning we can bring to it. So we're going to do this for the rest of the chapter, but let's take a little break and do word of the day first. All right, our word is illusion. With an A. Who needs? Yeah. Anyone else need a vocab sheet? Okay, an illusion. I'm going to tell you the long one and then I'll have you write down the short one. An expression designed to call something to mind without mentioning it explicitly. So in other words, an indirect reference. An allusion is an indirect reference.
do we need to have the word from yesterday? I mean, last time. Exigence?
Yeah, exigence. You will need to, so you'll just grab it from someone else. It doesn't have to be necessarily in order, but you'll need to have all of them. I'll do binder checks and check that they're all there. Okay, so it's an indirect reference. That means this is not the example, but it just as a illustrating example. A reference would be like saying the thing directly and making sure that your audience knew exactly what you were talking about. So if I said something like, just like Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, we are all following the yellow brick road to our dreams. I'm explicitly saying the yellow brick road metaphor is coming from The Wizard of Oz, and it is with a character named Dorothy. That is a direct reference to it. I'm trying to make sure everyone's on the same page. But if I were to say, oh yeah, I am following the yellow brick road to my dreams. I don't know if that sentence makes sense. I'm just trying to come up with it. But like, if I just said that, I'm following the yellow brick road to my dreams, and I don't reference The Wizard of Oz, and I don't say Dorothy, then that's more of an illusion. I'm actually saying the thing out loud, but my audience is going to have to like be on the same page with me. They're going to have to share a certain set of knowledge with me to understand the illusion. So there's an illusion in the first chapter of the book. It's about Anne Hutchinson. There's actually, this is one of the things that makes the Scarlet Letter very difficult to read, is there are constant allusions. Yeah. A lot of biblical allusions, especially.
Well, a lot of the naming places too.
Yeah. So in the last paragraph of the prison door, it says, this rose bush, by a strange chance, has been kept alive in history, but whether it had merely survived out of the stern old wilderness so long after the fall of the gigantic pines and oaks that originally overshadowed it, or whether, as there is fair authority for believing, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door, we shall not take upon us to determine. So the example I want you to write down is right there. It says, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson. Just write that down on the page. It had sprung up under footsteps. Sainted Anne Hutchinson. All right. Some of you guys might have copies of the book that have notes in the back, and you can learn about Anne Hutchinson that way. A lot of you guys don't have copies that have notes, and some of the notes are a little bit like, I don't know, a lot bit brief. So you can use a Chromebook for this, or you can use your phones, however you want to. I want you to look up who Anne Hutchinson was and try and just, I'm going to give you like 4 minutes. Just look up some brief details about Anne Hutchinson. What can you find out about her? It says, like, what does it say at the bottom again? Yes, so find out what her beliefs are, find out where she was banned to. Find out what her whole deal was, why it was so bad. Yeah. Lexi, so I gave out packets that you'll get when you get back. That's what they're using. But this is just in the very first chapter, the prison door. It's at the end of that chapter in the last paragraph. It says, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson. And it's about that wild rose bush right outside the prison.
Yes, exactly. And he's gonna
So look up what antinomian means.
We can learn about her last year.
I'm like, solid.
And she's not good at drawing, like, look at that self-portrait. Like, really? Like, don't get me wrong, I should do better, but I'm not good at it.
Okay, you got some info about her? Okay, tell me about Anne Hutchinson. Who was she? So kicked out for being religious. Where was she kicked out to? She was kicked out of the colony. Where's she forced to go? It's too fast. She's forced to go to Rhode Island. No, awful, right?
Imagine. I mean, she could walk across that like a day. if she wanted to.
Okay, yeah, question. Was Rhode Island the same time as now, or was it?
It wasn't a thing yet.
Huge community, like.
It was, there was like no one there.
It was the thing.
Very low.
I would like to argue
She was
that.
kicked out to basically like the wilderness.
I don't think
Yeah,
that's a white
Same amount of people.
yeah, great question. I believe there were some communities in Rhode
Oh,
Island.
she was an American feminist.
Yes, okay, we're gonna put that in quotations. Yeah, feminist.
And challenge like
Challenge the patriarchy.
Are we writing this stuff? Good.
No, not necessarily. I'm just making us a list here and then I'll show you how to do it. Okay, so she challenges the patriarchy. How does she do that?
He said that good works and holy life will not ensure salvation.
Yes, so she challenged, so basically what happened, here she is in Massachusetts Bay Colony. She feels like all of these dudes that are preaching, like all of the Reverend Dimsdale type people, all the reverends and the people in authority are basically they're preaching the wrong gospel, she felt. She felt like they were saying that you could rely on your good works to get into heaven. And she was like, no, the real Puritan teaching is that you have to be saved by God's grace. So that's what antinomianism means. Antinomianism. So she basically was saying, no, we have to have complete faith in God. And you guys, all you men, you don't have enough faith in God. And you can imagine if it's the same situation as the Scarlet Letter, that she was persecuted, like they didn't like that. They didn't love that she was telling them that they weren't teaching the right gospel. Women were not allowed to teach the gospel. And if they did, if they were like preaching, okay, fine if you're having conversations with other women. We can like let that slide a little, but she had congregations coming that were intermixed, men and women. So here she is preaching to men, and that's what got her in huge trouble. So they said, no, you are not allowed to do that. You are blasphemous and you need to leave. So she left to Rhode Island, which was not Rhode Island yet at the time, yes. And a bunch of people followed her. And that's, I think, where we get this idea from. It was like she didn't necessarily see herself as that. She did see men and women equal under the eyes of God. But what happened was that all of these people followed her into Rhode Island and they started up a colony, and she basically becomes like, the head of that colony. Yeah. So that's Anne Hutchinson, and Hawthorne calls her sainted. It says that this wild rose bush flourished under her feet because she is the sainted Anne Hutchinson. So Elios. No, you can say.
Wouldn't that mean that the rose bush is like a symbol of
Yes, it could be perseverance. It could be going against the patriarchy. It could be going against just like established tradition. It could be that she was somebody who was interesting. Could be that she was right in her faith, that like, having faith in God is a good thing. Yeah, Cressa.
Could it be like independence?
It could be a kind of independence, like sticking to your guns and sticking to what you believe. Yeah. No?
Well, since you said that it sprung up under her foot, like he's kind of to Catholicism, because in Catholicism you have to have like a certain amount of miracles to be considered a saint.
Yes, good.
And so the way that he called her sainted, and that rose bush coming up in her steps kind of says that even though she's not Catholic, because she is Protestant. Yeah. But it's just alluding to the other Christianity.
Exactly, and the Puritans would be disgusted by the idea of someone being a saint, right?
Yeah, she was excluded because she's really different.
Yeah, good. Okay, I want you to take all those ideas and your own ideas and write about them under the effects box here. What is the effect of alluding to Anne Hutchinson in that quote? What? I don't know what that means. Oh, it didn't affect you. Yeah, I just mean like on the meaning, not necessarily the emotional effect. How does it affect the meaning? Anne Hutchinson didn't deserve what she got. Oh, did she? I didn't know. I don't know that part of the story. Yikes. That's what you get for preaching to men.
This part's really sad. Men are lost causes. We'll just talk about it.
That's one way of seeing it, I guess.
How
Yeah.
I interpret it.
So writing down as much as you can under effects. Oh, yeah, massacred by Indians. A daughter was carried away by the Indians. I wonder what happened there. At this time period, like actually a little bit earlier than this, a really popular genre in America was Indian captive narratives. So it was mostly women who were raised by Native Americans, like either kidnapped or through war, they were like kind of adopted because they were orphaned and adopted by Native American tribes. And then they would come back and write a book about the experience. They're super interesting. There's a whole bunch of them. Just a little tidbit. That has nothing to do with anything. Okay, you can put that away when you're done. But we're still looking at the prison door. Because we're still showing just how much you can say about a tiny bit of writing.
Pretty much saying a girl came out of prison. There's a room.
Right, that's the plot. Like a girl came out of the prison, there were people there. But there's so much more than that. The reason we're doing this, let me just, before we get even more into it, the reason we're doing this is because this is basically what the AP test forces you to do, asks you to do, I should say. Gives you the opportunity to do. They'll give you a passage about this length as this first one, and they'll say, read this and tell me what rhetorical choices the author made and why. And then you'll write an essay in 40 minutes about what rhetorical choices the author made. So it's great practice to really dive into something with the most amount of detail you can, because then you could have tons to write about it. So we're going to do like a guided annotation thing. I'm going to read a little bit to you, and then I'm going to tell you what to comment on. And I'm going to give you 2 minutes or so to comment in the margins on as much as you can. So in this first part, you are looking for nouns. So you're looking for proper nouns, and you can use your phones or your computers to look up what those proper nouns are for sure. You're looking for proper nouns, but you're also just looking for any kind of nouns. Nouns are people, places, or things. Yeah, objects. Okay. So we've already read the first sentence. We did plenty with that first sentence. Let's move on. The founders of a new colony, whatever utopia of human virtue and happiness they might originally project, have invariably recognized it among their earliest practical necessities to allot a portion of the virgin soil as a cemetery, and another portion as the site of a prison. In accordance with this rule, it may safely be assumed that the forefathers of Boston had built the first prison house somewhere in the vicinity of Cornhill, almost as seasonably as they marked out the first burial ground on Isaac Johnson's lot, and round about his grave, which subsequently became the nucleus of all the congregated sepulchres in the old churchyard of King's Chapel. Okay, stopping there, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to comment on the nouns so far. You don't have to hit every single one, but just choose a couple and see what you can say about those nouns. Lexi, I don't know if you have a book that you can write in. If you do, then you can just do this in your book and take a picture of it at the end. If you don't, if you can just make, notes on a piece of paper. And you're just annotating on nouns. Okay, good. Okay, wherever you got to is fine. We're gonna do the next part. So in this next part, it starts to develop some patterns in the images, including patterns that we were already starting to recognize here at the beginning. So this time you're commenting on what patterns you find, meaning what kind of things are being repeated in this second part. Certain it is that some 15 or 20 years after the settlement of the town, the wooden jail was already marked with weather stains and other indications of age, which gave a yet darker aspect to this beetle-browed and gloomy front. The rust on the ponderous ironwork of its oaken door looked more antique than anything else in the New World. Like all that pertains to crime, it seemed never to have known a youthful era. Before this ugly edifice and between it and the wheel track of the street was a grass plot much overgrown with burdock, pigweed, apple peru, and such unsightly vegetation, which evidently found something congenial in the soil that had so early borne the black flower of civilized society, a prison. So commenting on any patterns that you're seeing start to emerge in the imagery. Okay, next part. So for this part, you're going to try and comment on the metaphors. So some of the metaphors are a little bit obvious and other metaphors are not as obvious. Anything that is not meant to be taken absolutely literally, that is a metaphor. So it says, but on one side of the portal and rooted almost at the threshold was a wild rose bush covered in this month of June with its delicate gems is a metaphor, which might be imagined to offer their fragrance and fragile beauty to the prisoner as he went in. Flowers offering something is probably a little bit of a metaphor. And to the condemned criminal as he came forth to his doom in token, I think token could be a metaphor there, that the deep heart of nature, definitely a metaphor, could pity and be kind to him. So I listed a few of them there. I think that's all of them. And you're going to try and comment on the metaphors. Why do you think that Hawthorne uses these as metaphors? Why not just call them flowers? Why call them a gem? Only just the part that I read. So not yet to the very last paragraph. Okay, last bit. So in this last paragraph, you're going to be commenting on what you think the argument is or the analogy. So basically, I don't think we're supposed to be meant to take this wild rose and this door as absolutely literal. Yes, there is a rose bush. Yes, there is a prison door in the community, but we're supposed to see some sort of like a symbolic meaning in it, right? Or else why is he spending so long on a prison door? So this last paragraph, I think, starts to clarify what that meaning might be, and you're going to comment on what you think the argument is. So it says, this rose bush, by a strange chance, has been kept alive in history, but whether it had merely survived out of the stern old wilderness so long after the fall of the gigantic pines and oaks that originally overshadowed it, or whether, as there is fair authority for believing, it had sprung up under the footsteps of the sainted Anne Hutchinson as she entered the prison door, we shall not take upon us to determine. Finding it so directly on the threshold of our narrative, which is now about to issue from that inauspicious portal, we could hardly do otherwise than pluck one of its flowers and present it to the reader. It may serve, let us hope, to symbolize some sweet moral blossom that may be found along the track, or relieve the darkening close of a tale of human frailty and sorrow. Okay, 2 minutes to comment on what you think now the argument is here. We could think about this like, what argument is he making about human nature? What argument is he making about the use of prisons, or about the decoration of the wild rose bush? You could think about what argument he's saying about the use of storytelling. He's talking about entering into the narrative. I'm just writing that down. Oh, like editorial narration. Oh yeah, I wonder if it's actually flipped though. I wonder if Hester's the rose bush. But she is the one going into the prison, so I don't know. Okay. Okay, let's pause on that. Wherever you got to is fine. And I'm going to have you just talk to the person you've been talking to all along about now what you think the argument is. So just talk about what you just wrote. Yeah, so I feel like there's so much in common between Hester and Anne Hutchinson in that like both of them felt like their community or both of their communities felt like they were sinners. They were ostracized. I mean, potentially we could kind of see them as like feminist icons. Not that Hester like thinks that men and women are equal or anything like that, but that she kind of like just has to live her life the way she sees fit, without male control because they've shoved her out of the society. So in that way, if Anne Hutchinson is like the wild rose bush, I think of Hester being like the wild rose bush. And even more so though, I think of Pearl as the wild rose bush. We like talked in this class about how she is like a light of hope in the book. Like she's the fun one when everybody else is so dull and sad colored. And so we could think of her as like the offspring of sin, being the one thing that brings like joy and vibrancy to the community. And it exists like right outside the prison door. Like it's a wild rose bush, it's not controlled. And so the prison kind of like enables that wild rose bush to exist. That's kind of what I was thinking of it. So yes, I just wanted to talk to you since this part's partner. But I added you to the, it's called class recording August 23rd, 24th for today. And you're going to take a picture of what you've been doing and you're going to submit it that way. And that's how you get participation points for the day. And then you won't need to worry about watching the recording, obviously. You've already seen it.
Really jarring. And then in the last one it says survived out of the stern old wilderness, like tradition, like society, and what else did I say about it? And like all of the trees falling around it, like trials. Yeah, like maybe it was hard for it to survive. I completely forgot. He's like,
all right, let's get back together. So one of the ways that I approach trying to figure out what an argument is when it is this abstracted, when it seems to be just so symbolic, is I take the symbol and I try and pick it apart to find out why this symbol would have been a good symbol for the idea that Hawthorne seems to have here. So the main symbol of there's two of them, right? We've got a prison door. And we've got a wild rose bush. And those two symbols seem to be interacting in that last paragraph in a way that is telling us some sort of argument about what this story is going to be about. And in order to like try and figure out what that's going to be, I start thinking about the physical qualities of the symbol itself. So tell me about, don't even worry about prison. Tell me about doors. What is a door? Yeah, Cressida.
They call it a portal.
Yeah, okay, so they use this word, and I think that's a great word, portal. What does that mean, though? Why would we call it door a portal?
It's like a door to another world.
Yes, okay, so the door could be an obstacle to another world. It could be like from one state to another, right? But we don't have to think about that supernaturally. Like he might be, I think he is thinking of portal as supernaturally, but we could just think of it like it's a portal from one place to another. So like the door to our classroom, you're outside the classroom and then suddenly you're inside the classroom, right? So it's this like transformation.
Max an opportunity to change, I guess.
Ah, good. So then if that's true, one thing to another, then it's kind of like about change, a change in states of being. I'm outside and now I'm inside. Yes, Sebastian?
I think it also represents like the human populace of like, I guess humans are the ones who choose where the door goes. Like it's not like this area was already a classroom.
Yeah.
Someone put in the door and that made it the classroom.
Brilliant.
So I guess.
Definitely. Yeah. If there were no walls, would this be a classroom still? And how do we designate that it's a classroom, right? And so it's like about the human construction of the door. Excellent. Rose?
Have you heard that like psychology thing where if you enter like a room, like once once you pass through the doorway, you lose memory. So if you forget what you're doing when you enter a room, it's because you went through the doorway.
No, that's interesting.
It's like a new like place to you.
Uh-huh.
And you associate it with different things. And so you associate the last place you were with different things. That's why if you leave and think about it for a second, you can remember.
Excellent. So it's like actually a state of mind change between one thing and another. Yeah, Cressida.
It could be like a choice. So like for the secrecy part of the book, it could be like how Hester was forced to share her secret. Like she was forced to make that choice and share it.
Awesome. So I like this because it's talking about the choice from moving from one place to another. You have the choice to enter a doorway or go out of the doorway, right? But I also think that the door has to do with secrets. Like if you close a door, then what's behind that door suddenly becomes a secret to whoever's outside of the doorway, right? So I think it could be about that. Tell me something else about like the physical qualities of a door, rather than the symbolic intention of a door, like the physical qualities of a door. Some of it might be, yeah, some of it might be important, some of it might not be. Hinges, yeah.
This door specifically has like the iron spikes.
Yeah, okay, cool. So this one's covered in iron spikes. Okay,
A lock.
there's a lock on it sometimes. Noah?
Doors are kind of known as being like the most solid substance there is because
Good.
the point of it is like to keep stuff in and keep stuff in.
Good, okay, so they're solid because they are meant to be like keep things in or out.
But they can be opened.
But they can be opened. Awesome. So then in that way, I'm going to call them porous. They're both solid and porous. When they're open, it's like the pores are open and someone can enter or leave at will. But when they're closed, then there's this like barrier and it can keep things secure. Zachary?
It represents like security. You can choose when you want to be secure and safe.
Security and safety. Okay, awesome. All right, tell me about prisons now. What are prisons like?
Gray.
All right, cool. Colorless, right? Except for, I guess some of the prisoners wear orange, but yeah, Luke.
Protects the outside world from what's inside.
All right, protects outside from inside. Excellent. Yeah, Maxwell.
Punishment.
Yeah, it's a place of punishment. Yeah. How else should we see prisons? Alirose.
It dehumanizes the people and then turns them into
Dehumanizing. Restricting. Anything else about prisons? I mean, this is really dark, but rehabilitating, don't we?
Overprivileged. You only get a piece of pie for dinner.
Really? Torture. Anything else about prisons that we should put up here? Sad. Good. I'm gonna put like secluded or alienated. We don't like prisons to be seen. We want them to be gone. We're moving the prison in Draper because too many people moved to Draper and now they're like, well, we don't want a prison here. So we're moving it out to like near Magna, but like further away so that we don't have to look at it, you know? All right. I want you to do the same thing with your partner with wild rose and bush. Just put it on either the scrap piece of paper at the bottom of this prison door thing. You're going to think up all the characteristics of wild, all the characteristics of roses, and all the characteristics of bushes. So you're doing it separately, not as a wild rose bush, but separately, the different parts of it.
So we're not talking about.
You're not talking about the symbolic intentions. You're more like this. I mean, we did with doors, but we weren't specifically thinking about his door. Yeah.
Wild dogs. Wild dogs are trees.
Yeah.
I'm only going to give you 2 minutes for this so that we can actually get to what the argument might be.
Like they don't have a,
no like flowers, but like mountains or like wow.
See, I wanted to check in. Yeah. All right, awesome.
I mean, it's also very
Well, like from other things. Okay, wait. I know. As soon as I said that, I was like, wait, independence. Yeah.
Naturally.
They can get the things for themselves, like how you have to water your plants, like self-sufficient. Yeah. As soon as I said that, I'm like,
They don't do things.
Green, I feel like it represents a
Sometimes wild also in a way. Because some things that are wild. It's like first. Yeah, it's like the first thing.
like the thorns, so like
Red thorns.
painted, like kind of like painted beauty. And then like yeah, so I think of like love, like that one. I also really tragic. Yeah, love. I think of beauty and the beast is
Yeah.
like however already there.
Romance. Well, it's the same thing.
romance is better. Love is more happy, and romance gives me like beauty and the deep. Romance is more like rock, is like really dark. Yeah, cute. I didn't know that. I don't know them, but I don't know that.
I don't know. There's like a bunch of different stuff.
Yeah, and I think you can also
Bush. I think when I just like
I know, bush is kind of an ugly word.
ugly and bland.
Big, maybe.
Yeah.
All my bushes are too big. Good job. That's great.
There's usually
Alright, cool. These are all negative connotations though, and I think there's also positive connotations to wild. Like, I mean, I think you kind of get at it. It's like there's possibilities to wild.
Bushes, so maybe like opportunity to be something better than a bush. Because it could be a rose.
Okay, I gotta cut you off. I'm sorry. Good start on that. Tell me, after looking at all of these ideas about prison, all of these ideas about the door, why do you think it's so important that Hawthorne starts the story talking about a prison door, not the prison itself, but the prison door? All right, cool. So that's where we get into the society then, or get into the story, or just get in? I get that though, because I think it could be both. Like it could be you're entering into a story, right?
Yeah, the first steps are always through a doorway, I guess. So like for this book, it's one of the first steps in the story. First steps in the
Okay,
steps
cool.
for Anne.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, it's just like, or I mean.
So it's all about these first steps, right? And it probably depends. It probably depends how we see the doorway, whether we think that is what we think the meaning of those first steps are. So if the first steps of this, it says you're going to go through this portal, right? It says finding it so directly on the threshold of our narrative, which is now about to issue from that inauspicious portal, we could hardly do otherwise than pluck one of its flowers and present it to the reader. So are we in prison right now, walking through the doorway to find ourselves out? Or are we outside of prison now, walking through the doorway to find ourselves in? We're outside walking into prison?
We're in a drone, we're just like flying out.
Or we're just looking around. I mean, it says we're at the threshold and we're gonna go, right? Okay, let me get some thoughts. Yeah, press this.
I think it represents like the beginning of the story, because when he says he's gonna like pluck a flower and give it to us, it's like he's taking Hester and telling us her story.
Yeah, okay, cool. So it's like, here's the flower of Hester. You can take this and you can see it as like a beautiful moral tale where you find some moral in the lesson, right? Or the morals in the lesson are like really sad and gloomy, but at least you've got Hester, so like you can like, you know, have this little spark of joy. You can see it either way.
Yeah. I am not on Hester's side. I do not like Hester.
You don't like Hester? What about Pearl? Maybe it's Pearl.
Pearl's cool.
But he's saying like, I'll give you some, there will be some beauty in this story is basically what it's saying, whether it's Hester or whether it's somebody else, like there will be some beauty and you can either choose to see that beauty in just the people, or you can choose to see the beauty in the morals. Okay, but does that mean we're going into the prison then?
I don't think we're.
I don't think we're going through the door at all.
We're not going through the door, we're just at the threshold.
Yeah.
Well, it looked like she's about, like, it sounds like she's like, we're waiting for someone almost.
I
That's
am
what
in
I
the
feel like.
bush.
We're not going inside, we're waiting.
You're hiding in the wild rose bush.
Yes.
Yeah.
We are the bush.
We're bush.
We're outside of the prison and the story is going to issue forth from that inauspicious portal. So we're just waiting for the story to come to us, and it was in prison and now it is coming out. Okay, so then why would the story be a prison? Like, does that make sense? Like, why start with the prison of all things? Yeah.
So I got this is about the rose bush next to it.
Okay.
It's, I said, like, if you think about a rose bush is beautiful on the outside and like prickly on the inside, like it's really dangerous. And so there's the idea of like a rose bush kind of represents femme fatale. And I feel like Hester is going to be set up to look like the femme fatale, like she's set up as a harlot. She's beautiful and she's dangerous, but we know that she isn't.
Yeah.
So the way that it talks about the delicate gems, like maybe she's the delicate gem of the flower, but she looks like the rose bush. Like people want to see her. We talked about how she's a scapegoat. We want, the town wants her to look like she's dangerous and she's seductive and she'll hurt you if you get close, but really she's just the flower.
Okay, so then this becomes a story about the differences between inside and outside, right? And if you're willing to cross a threshold, if you're willing to cross a portal, you're going to be able to see the truth of the situation rather than just the outside appearances.
Yeah, and so we see her because we're at the prison door, so she's next to the, like the rose bush is next to the prison.
Yeah.
And we're about to see the flower.
Awesome. Okay, so if we were to take that, I'll get right to you in a second. If we were to take that and turn it into an argument that this book has, we don't necessarily want to say that the argument is just about Hester, because we're thinking thematically. We want to say that the argument is more about how people are. This is how people are. How would we frame what Noah just said into an argument about human nature? Elios? Okay.
Through Scarlet Letter, the idea of society being is supposed with the delicate flowers that are.
Let's start with that. Delicate flowers that are what?
That are
In society?
wildly stuff.
Wildly sprout. Okay, awesome. So let's take that one and let's try and generalize it a little bit, because we don't want it to just also be about, okay, thanks. We also just don't want it to be just about roses either. So how are we going to take this idea that is society inherently evil?
No, just that's true.
And he's telling us that it's not, because there are these delicate flowers that are wildly sprouting, right? Let's turn that literal. So it's like society is not inherently evil because, and how do we know that society is not inherently evil if we're to think of the flowers as a metaphor? What's the literal definition of a flower here? It's Hester, but like people in general, what kind of people? Yeah, Daniel. Well, I'm kind of trying to say, like, what does the flower stand in for? Like, how are we supposed to see the flower? Cameron, sorry, I'm having a hard time saying it.
Those people who are different.
Okay, cool. So different and unique people. So then if we're saying society is not inherently evil because it's also juxtaposed with different and unique people, then we're going to make the argument that those different and unique people, even if we might see them as evil, are not evil. And that's part of the argument here. Yes, good.
So like if you're looking at society as a rose bush, you have your flowers which are really more different, maybe they're a little nicer. Then you have people as leaves, more common, and then you have the thorns or the bad people.
Yes.
So you kind of get everyone in there.
Okay, cool. Cool. What's the significance of it sitting next to a prison, do you think?
I feel like the person kind of blocks the main ideas when they're a little more stubborn about what they think. So yeah, people who are able to stand out from it, and other people who can blend in.
Excellent. Okay, good. And I think that this book is far more interested in the people that stand out as being people that can move the society forward a little bit rather than being behind the stubborn walls of the prison. All right. You could have come up with whatever argument you wanted. As long as you could back it up, then I'm good with that. Here's what you're doing for your homework, because we have our first like real homework assignment. You're writing one more paragraph. I have graded your paragraphs from before and I've given you my comments on them. And then we had this discussion about how to close read effectively. So yeah, so you're gonna apply what we just talked about and my comments on the summer paragraphs. And you're gonna write a new paragraph. This one is about the human connection to nature. So this is on Canvas. You can see the assignment. And yeah, you turn it in. You can turn it in via Canvas, or you can print it and bring it to me however you want.
The due date tomorrow morning.
The due date is in 2 days. Yeah, at 7 a.m. So it's due next class before class at 7 a.m. Or you're bringing it. Yeah. So I should change that, doesn't it?
Oh yeah, if you want us to bring it.
I don't care for this little assignment. Yeah. Okay, let me just clarify one thing before you go. I'm sorry. I know the bells are gonna ring. I have 30 seconds. If you ever miss class, you still need to make up participation points. The way you do that is I record class and it's online. So if you missed last class because of the assembly, then you'll watch the video, you'll do the classwork, and you'll turn in a picture. Thank you. You're good to go.
And then what's our paragraph about?
It's about the human connection to nature, and but it's worded much clearer on the Canvas assignment.
Okay.
Yeah.
So are we gonna be starting doing weekly essays, or is that just a myth I heard?
It kind of